6 years old today, if she were alive. She was described as a happy baby. A baby just 2 weeks after coming home was already a good sleeper. But Abby never got the chance to grow up. Abby is dead because of the defendant's actions. Abby is dead because the defendant threw out her adult daughter, Ariana, her friend, Brianna, and her other daughter, Amaya, out of the house. She threw out the very same people who were there to help her watch the kids. Abby is dead because the defendant couldn't take care of 4 kids by herself on the night of February 23rd, 2019. Abby is dead because of the series of choices that the defendant made on February 23rd, 2019. And all of these choices are the defendant's consequence to bear. Yet the defense would have you believe that there is blame to go around. Blame Abby's mom, who may have taken a drug she was allergic to. Blame the detective for not collecting evidence 5 months after Abby died. Blame the medical examiner for concluding that Abby's death was from diphenhydramine toxicity and nothing else. Shift blame to everyone else, but ignore the defendant's actions and choices. But the person on trial here is the defendant. And while you will judge the credibility of every witness who took the stand, you cannot ignore the facts. Everyone can wish for a video that captures that exact moment in time when it happened. But that's not reality, and that's not reasonable. Reason and common sense tells us that crimes that happen in a home, crimes that occur between 2 people in a relationship of sort, whether they be romantic or parent and child, are very rarely going to be seen by others. So what do we have to rely on to complete the whole picture? It's our reason and our common sense. Every day in our lives, people make decisions not being able to examine every detail. People do it when the mechanic tells you that a part is broken in your car. You don't get under the car and look, you pay the bill. You do it every time you do a crossword or a Wheel of Fortune puzzle. You solve a puzzle without knowing every single letter or every single number. People use your common sense every day to complete the picture, and in this case, you can do the same. And to be clear, you're not without evidence to support that reason and common sense that you have. Everyone said in jury selection that they would want evidence in addition to just what people said. And you have evidence. You have it in the form of testimony from the first responders, from the civilian witnesses, Brianna and Anna, from the experts, the state's doctors. You have the exhibits. You're gonna see those text messages. You're gonna have a chance to listen to that 911 call in the back. You have photographs. What does the state have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt? That on or about February 23rd, 2019 to and including February 24th in the city and county of Honolulu, state of Hawaii, defendant caused the death of Abigail Lobish. Wherever you see AL, we're talking about Abigail Lobish. And that she did so recklessly. The defendant recklessly caused the death of Abigail Lobish in the city and county of Honolulu. So what's not at issue here? Well, we know that this happened in the city and county of Honolulu. Abby died at 4675 K Street. That's the defendant's home. We know the date. Abby died between February 23rd and 24th, 2019. She was pronounced dead on February 24th, 2019. That's clear. That's not at issue. You have another question in your packet, and I want to make sure we address this before we get too far into the argument. You'll have to answer this question, and it's a simple one. The answer is yes. Did the defendant have physical custody over a child? Yes, she had physical custody over Abby. Physical custody means physical care and supervision. The answer to that question is a unanimous yes. Now let me explain to you how the state has proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt. In the most simplest terms, it comes down to, did the defendant give Abby diphenhydramine? And did the state prove that? The answer is yes. The state has proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. We can go back to school time when we learned about the 5 W's, right? Who, what, where, when, and why. Who? Who caused Abby's death? It was the defendant. But you're asking yourself, well, how do we know she did it? Well, let's look at who had physical custody over Abby on February 23rd and 24th. This had been in the works for days. You'll have a copy of the text messages in the back, and the conversation about the defendant watching Abby that weekend starts on February 21st. And in this text message, it's the defendant who is agreeing to help because her girls are going to help watch the kids. Yes, I did. So drop them off at what time tomorrow? We could make that work. Just spoke to the girls about it. They said they'll keep an eye on Z, and I will be in charge of Abby. She knew she would have the help she needed on that day to watch 4 young children. Now, we know Anna dropped Abby and Zach off at about 10:45 a.m., and here are the messages that show that. You can look at the time. I just stood in line to get the wristbands. We're in 7:43, 10:31 a.m. Come up, 10:42 a.m. By 10:47 a.m., Anna is saying, thank you. He's gonna have so much fun.
Baby Abby deserves justice, that is for sure. Will she get it, though, is the larger question. Let me bring in our legal analyst guest this hour. He's a very seasoned trial attorney, former homicide prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, good morning to you. I want to ask you, please, if you think that these prosecutors can make that link for the jury, that defendant Denise Villa was the only one who would have administered that fatal dose of Benadryl.
Yeah, they're starting that off in their closing, and she's doing a very good job of that. You know, she's laying out the timeline of the 2 other kids who were supposed to be there helping the defendant at the time. She's laying out the timeline of when the child got there, when Abby got there. And I think we're going to see here soon is that she's going to put it in a nice little package that the defendant was the only one that could have done this, the only one that could have administered this Benadryl that ultimately killed Abby. Because that's obviously the defense's argument was, one of their arguments at least, was somebody else did this, you don't know. You know, they're sort of throwing that suspicion to the jury, saying somebody else could have done this. It couldn't have been our client, Miss Villa.
Right, Randolph. Tell me, how tough is that when you're a prosecuting attorney and you feel very confident that you know what happened, but you're frustrated because it's really tough to prove what you believe were the circumstances of someone's death?
Yeah, I mean, as a prosecutor, you're always worried about what the defense is going to raise, what sort of suspicion or doubt they're going to cast in the eyes of the jury. But you have to rely on your case, the evidence, and being able to lay that out in the most clear and concise way for that jury to explain it. I always thought, too, that when I was prosecuting cases that I wanted to make that connection with the jury to not seem so formal, but almost to make it feel like we were having a conversation, that we were trying. You know, I always tell people the hardest thing to do is to get 12 people or a jury to agree what you're telling them. And it really is. But if you make that connection with them and say, hey, look, trust me, this is the evidence, this is the information, this is what you have, you can't have any doubt. That's really what you have to do as a prosecutor.
Oh, Randolph, you're so right. That connection matters so much, where a jury doesn't want to feel like you're talking at them, but that you're talking right to them and relating to them. And like you said, trustworthiness. If they don't find you trustworthy as a lawyer, as an advocate, then things may not go your way. Great points. Randolph Rice, please stand by. We're going to hit a break. When we come back, we'll show you more of the closing arguments in the baby medicine manslaughter trial. This is all about the death of little Abigail Lopasich.
This case clearly on the national forefront, brutal murder of this young woman, Laken Riley.
Investigators say she was beaten to death while going on a run.
This is a heartbreaking time for the university. We have a suspect in custody, Jose Antonio Ibarra. He did not know her at all.
Such a violent, unprovoked act. Will there be justice for Laken Riley?
The murder of Laken Riley. Live coverage begins Friday, only on Court TV.
Abby. Is she awake or is she conscious? No. Okay. Have you started CPR if she's not breathing, ma'am? Okay. Continue with CPR. We've got some help coming out to you.
Abby.
You saw Defendant Dixie Villa getting emotional hearing that 911 call during the testimony when she found baby Abby wasn't breathing. But the prosecution says that she is responsible for her death. Today, we're on a verdict watch in the baby medicine manslaughter case. The jury coming back at 2 p.m. Eastern time. They were out for a little over an hour yesterday after getting this case, and the judge put a restriction on when we can air the footage. So you haven't seen the closing arguments yet. We played a little bit. There's more from the prosecution. Let's go back in and hear what else they told the jury.
Instead, it was the 2-year-old who didn't belong to her. When they got home, Abby was crying. Reason and common sense tells you that crying can be overwhelming. It can be stressful to listen to a baby cry when you're trying to do multiple things. Number 5, when you listen to that 911 call, you can hear the kids in the background. There is not a minute of peace as the defendant is trying to talk to 911 and trying to give CPR. And you'll have that 911 call with you when you go in the deliberation room, and you can hear the level of chaos that is occurring in that house. And the kids aren't crying about Abby. It just sounds like play. That's why this happened. The defendant gave the kids iPads and gave Abby Benadryl so she herself could go to sleep and rest after a long day. Her own text messages say how tired they all were. They were sunburned. There is no evidence of sunburn in this case, not in the defendant's picture during the recreation, and not on Abby based on the testimony of Dr. Gates. Now, your job is to determine the credibility of the witnesses, and the jury instructions give you guidance on how to do that. You consider the witness's appearance, demeanor, candor or frankness, the probability or improbability of the witness's testimony. Now, during jury selection, I asked about how you would decide who was telling you the truth. Many of you guys wanted evidence to go along with that. Some people have gut feelings about how they know someone is telling the truth. But there are a number of ways that you can use to determine who is telling you the truth when you hear 2 different versions of events. And yesterday, you heard 2 very competing ideas on Abby's death. Dr. Gates last week testified that Abby died from diphenhydramine toxicity. And yesterday, the defense expert, Okori Okorocha, said Dr. Gates didn't do it right. So let's talk about that. It is for you to determine how much weight to give each witness. And the state would submit that Mr. Okorocha was not the expert he claimed to be. He took great offense to the state's questioning his integrity, even claiming that the state was misleading you. But who is misleading who here, ladies and gentlemen? Mr. Okorocha spent 100 hours on this case, not including work done by his associates, charging $400 an hour, $40,000 to bill for this work, the equivalent of someone's salary. Yet what does he have to show for it? He came up here and he said he didn't do a report because it was important to bring the science. What science did he show you? What report did he cite? He cited a single article that the state's expert used in its autopsy report. Not a single other piece of science was used by Okorocha. No report in 18 months and 100 hours. No new science to explain his position. And how about his credentials? He basically sat here and poo-pooed or disregarded every person who's gotten a board certification in forensic toxicology, saying that their accreditation was comparable to that of Billy Bob. He's an expert in his field, not recognized at his own choosing to be a part of these accrediting bodies. Yet the state's expert, Dr. Gates, took the time to consult with NMS Labs, to consult with a board-certified toxicology in making testing decisions. What else was misleading about Mr. Okorocha's testimony? The genetic abnormality. He never actually named one and never said which one Abby had. The only genetic abnormality was the CAH that Dr. Gates testified, and that has nothing to do with the protein enzymes such as cytochrome P450. Abby did not have CAH, and Dr. Gates did a thorough autopsy. How else was Mr. Okorocha misleading? The state took time to talk about Mr. Okorocha's website, and it might have seemed to belabor the point, but why was that important? Does it make any sense at all that you would have a website for yourself that is clearly an advertisement, and he said as much, and yet take no responsibility for the content? Is there any business out there that would put up a website and not confirm the content about themselves online? You can put all the disclaimers you want, but at the end of the day, what's in your name, you have to take responsibility for. And he refused to do it. He also refused to take responsibility for those opinions where an appeals court found him not credible. He couldn't remember them, but clearly wanted to explain them. So is it that he didn't remember them or not? And what was the explanation? Blame the hearings officer who made the determination. He didn't give you a legal reason why he was not credible. He just blamed the prosecutor, like he's trying to do here, shifting the blame to the state, even though, according to him, expert witnesses should be unbiased. But right out the gate, the first words out of his mouth is how the state was flawed, and he was here to show you. So who was misleading who? What else was misleading about this trial? How about that science experiment with Dr. Aiken yesterday? Those were 20 milliliter cups, adult-sized doses. 30 to 40 times that adult dose is 600 milliliters. That's why that cup was so full. Dr. Aiken was very clear. A child's dose is a 5 milliliter cup. That would only be 150 milliliters. What you saw in that cup was 10 times more than what a child would get. And again, for infants, Dr. Aiken was also clear. He would even do half of that amount for an infant. So not the 12.5 milligrams per milliliter, rather 6.25 milligrams per milliliter. So to say that 3 cups is what was in that infant is wrong. And Dr. Aiken was clear about that. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line is no infant, and definitely not Abby, should have had any diphenhydramine in her system. It is not for infants, and there's no way around that.
Is the prosecutor convincing you? She's saying that this defendant babysitter wanted to get a good night's rest, and so that she medicated the baby with diphenhydramine or Benadryl so that the baby would sleep through the night and never anticipated the baby's death. We will see what else the state says. They've got a little more argument to go, and then we're going to hear the defense argument. A very interesting case is they're pointing the finger at the baby's mother and her breast milk. Here's a picture of little Abby Lobasic as we head to break. Thanks for being with us on this Thursday morning. I want to get you back into the closing arguments in the baby medicine manslaughter trial. We're also monitoring another case for you in Georgia. It started back up just moments ago. The court has ordered us to be on a slight delay in putting it out publicly. It is the Cult baby murder trial. So we're going to air it after we get past the 1 hour mark. Judge's orders. Now, Chloe Driver is the defendant in this one. This case is wild. This lady belonged to a cult, and she stabbed her little baby, Hannah, to death. She's saying she's not guilty by reason of insanity. And on Wednesday, we heard outrageous and downright disgusting testimony from fellow cult member Jason Spillers.
I observed a very beautiful, healthy relationship.
And what about Z and the 3 women? How would you all spend your day to day? Like, what would you do during the day?
Gosh, most of this time from October 4th was caring for Kawani. honestly, and trying to help her find her way back to a place of sanity. There was and then there was talk about how the baby is going to die. Like, I heard her say that. I never heard her say, I'm going to hurt the baby. I never heard her say, I'm going to kill the baby. I never heard her say anything like that. I did hear her say the baby's going to die. I have to protect her.
And we know she searched how to snap a neck prior to the baby's death. We know that. We know this guy also drinks his own urine, so there's that as well. We're going to keep you posted on what's going on in Georgia. We've got our cameras there, and again, as soon as we're past the court-ordered delay, we're going to go there live. Now let's go back to Hawaii. This is really something. We've got another court-ordered delay. So what's new today are the closing arguments. We weren't allowed to air them yesterday. We are today. So let's go back in and hear more from the state as they are accusing the babysitter, Denise Villa, of killing the child that she was watching.
Judging a book by its cover. And we all agreed that we can't really do that. You need to know more about a person. It's reason and common sense that you can't tell just by looking at someone whether or not they've caused someone else's death. And that's why we have to look at actions. We have to look at conduct, lack of action, and you have to combine that with your reason and common sense. When you are judging the credibility of the witness, you'll want to know what is reasonable to believe, what makes sense. And in this case, there are all kinds of things that should raise red flags about the defendant's behavior on February 23rd and 24th. Look at the defendant's house. The image portrayed when you walk in this door is one of cleanliness, someplace you don't mind leaving your kid. Now compare that with this bedroom. Is this a person who can handle 4 kids? Is this a place where a person who paid a babysitter is expecting their child to sleep? Well, we know that's not what Anna thought. Anna was thinking that her baby was going to sleep in a crib and her son on a cot. She was not expecting her child to sleep in this bed. She doesn't share a bed with her child. She uses a sidecar. As of February 22nd, Anna thought that her baby would sleep in a crib. There's a crib in this house. With 2 other kids. There are 5 bedrooms in this house, and all of them are unoccupied because all that's left in this house that night is the defendant and 4 young children. Why would the defendant's own children need to Why would the defendant, a paid babysitter, bed share with 4 kids that night on a day when everyone is tired from being in the sun? Dr. Gates talked about safe sleep practices for babies, and this is not a safe sleep practice. What else doesn't make sense? The way that the defendant is sleeping with Abby. Who goes to bed cradling a child like that? She's not a breastfeeding mother. Why hold her that way? Doesn't make sense. And then this. If you were next to Abby that whole night, how did she end up like that? How did she end up face down in a pillow so long that lividity was so pronounced on the front of her body? And your other child is up there on top of the pillows above them. Now, how about the defendant's demeanor? Why doesn't that make sense? You could hear it in the 911 call, crying and emotional. It took EMS only 4 minutes to arrive at that house. And yet they described her as not crying, calm and cooperative. So did Officer Gredander, and so did Detective Kaeo. How did she go from hysterical 911 call to calm and cooperative in 4 minutes? Is it reasonable to believe that you would be this calm when a child has just died in your home? No, that's not reasonable to believe. It would be reasonable if you had time to prepare and plan the call and plan your response. Ladies and gentlemen, you were asked to decide the credibility of witnesses and the weight you give to each of their testimonies. But the harder decision to make is the one.
Okay, that part right there, let's pause it. That just gave me chills. This is really eerie. This prosecutor is accusing the defendant of planning that call, essentially saying that she was faking it when she was emotional and asking the dispatcher what to do, saying she started CPR. Her argument is that 4 minutes later, when emergency responders got to the scene, she was calm, she was cool, she was collected, she was cooperative. What do you think about these arguments? Was it faking when she made that 911 call? Let's bring in our legal analyst guest, see what he thinks. Randolph Rice watching along remotely with us. Okay, Randolph, tell us, what are you convinced of at this point in the state's argument?
Well, I think they've done a good job of attacking the defense's so-called expert witness, Mr. Okechora. And I love how she refers to him as Mr. Okechora as opposed to a doctor. She pokes a lot of holes in his stories and pretty much says, he's essentially a quack. Whatever he says, it's for his own benefit because he's making $40,000. So she's doing a good job attacking their expert, which is really what she has to do on that end of it. And she's also showing how this is just unreasonable behavior, which is what they need to prove ultimately in the manslaughter charges, which is the reckless behavior. So again, she's laying that groundwork, saying that this is just not reasonable. This is not what somebody normally would do. But at the end of the day, what's so strange and interesting to me is how much of that Benadryl is in this baby. You should not have been giving that to this baby. So I think she's making a great case right now.
You're right, Randolph. Yeah, the amount, that was a moment. She created a good moment when she was talking about that lethal amount and how much it would take for an adult to feel the effects versus a child of little baby Abby's size. Randolph, stand by kindly, please. We're going to hit a break. When we come back, there's more. We're going to listen to the final portion of the state's closing argument next.
Says I went to the wrong crowd, but I think I was the wrong crowd.
Nobody in this world loves you like your parents.
And he said to me, when it'd be cool if I killed my parents and had a party.
I couldn't get out of my head. I couldn't stop.
Which do you think you are? Sick and treatable or irredeemably mad?
Interview with a Killer. Season finale, Sunday, 8/7 Central. And don't miss the new season coming in 2025, only on Court TV.
Meet Mike. Mike's been hearing
Nobody can force you to testify in your own defense if you do not want to, you understand?
Yes, sir.
The ultimate decision to testify is yours alone, you understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you have any questions for the court about your right to testify? Do you understand your right to testify fully? And your decision this afternoon is that you are exercising your right to remain silent.
Yes, Your Honor.
This is your decision alone.
Yes, Your Honor.
After, again, fully discussing the matter and with your attorney.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
She fooled us. We all thought that she was going to testify, but it is her right not to, and the jury can't hold it against her. That's defendant Denise Villa. We're watching the baby medicine manslaughter trial and the all-important closing arguments. There she is. Someone who did babysitting for different people has babysat this little baby who died before, little baby Abby Lobasich. And during this particular overnight babysitting event, Abby didn't wake up. And the prosecutor said that Denise Villa faked the 911 call, essentially saying that she was hysterical and just found the baby, when the prosecution saying no, she planned when she would call 911 because she was very collected when emergency responders arrived. Let's see what else the state has in the final portion of their argument.
But the harder decision to make is the one the state's asking you to make. The decision to find the defendant guilty of manslaughter. Finding her guilty for causing Abby's death. The easier thing would be to go back in that deliberation room and say, well, maybe it was an accident. But it wasn't an accident. That's not supported by the evidence, and it's not supported by your reason and common sense. The defendant made choices on February 23rd. She made the choice to have the kids come over. She made a choice over a fight, even though none of them live here in Hawaii. She made a choice to put all these kids together in a bed. She made a choice to give the younger ones iPads to go to sleep. She made a choice to give Abby diphenhydramine to sleep.
Objection. Basham.
Overruled. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there's a court-breaching instruction where the attorney's closing arguments is not evidence. The evidence is what you came out of the witnesses. You do not have to rely on their interpretation of the evidence. Thank you.
She made a choice to sleep with the baby cradled in her arms, to bed share, even though there were cots, cribs, and bedrooms. The easier thing to do would to be go back in the deliberation room and say, maybe there is reasonable doubt. But what is reasonable doubt? It's a doubt in your mind about the defendant's guilt, which arises from the evidence presented or from the lack of evidence, and which is based on reason and common sense. A doubt which has no basis in the evidence presented or the lack of evidence or reasonable inferences therefrom, or a doubt which is based upon imagination, suspicion, or guesswork is not a reasonable doubt. Reason and common sense is not something that you check at that door when you become a juror. You use it every day, and you use it here too when you sit in that chair. And just because it's the easier decision doesn't make it the right decision. You are here to review the evidence, use the law, and to make a decision that justice demands. What happened to Abby was all set into motion by the defendant's choices. But the one choice she could have made was to call Anna or James and say, come get your kids. I can't watch them anymore. She never gave them that choice. She never gave them the choice that could have saved Abby's life. And for all the reasons that the state has explained, find the defendant guilty of recklessly causing the death of Abigail Lobish. Find this defendant guilty of manslaughter.